Hey, good people. I'm going to try to make this one quick today, but I wanted to make sure I got this concept out so you can begin to employ it in your own conversations and your own thought process around all the stuff that's going on, right? So we find ourselves in situations where we're talking about people and we're talking about allies and we're talking about racism and we're talking about what amounts to a very binary conversation. You're either with me or against me. And we're telling people that not being a racist isn't enough, that they need to be full-on anti-racist. And I understand the logic behind that, but I want to make sure that we give people enough room and enough space to matriculate at their own pace, that we're not trying to force something down someone's throat, because when you do, what you get is you get kind of this superficial compliance and you don't get the real kind of emotional investment required and actually to do anything significant in this overall fight. So I want you to consider something for a second. I want you to consider that there are people who are unaffected by racism. And that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist in their circle. That doesn't mean that they haven't benefited from some kind of way. That doesn't mean that they haven't been hurt from it some kind of way. What it means is they've carefully cultivated their own sphere of influence, their own life, their own bubble, a world that on a daily basis does not encounter racism in the way that we do, just based on our existence and based on our own encounters and our own experience. And ultimately, their experience is something separate and distinct from our experience. And in that way, they're unaffected by what's going on in our world. Now, yes, this is a symbiotic relationship. Yes, this is the world. Yes, we all live on the same planet. We live in the same country. We live in the same city. We live in the same state, maybe even work in the same business, maybe live in the same neighborhoods, and children go to the same school. So they're not entirely unaffected, but the life that they've created inside of that circle is unaffected. And so that life that they live, being unaffected by those things, is being challenged by all the stuff going on in the world now. And unaffected does not mean that these people are racist. Unaffected does not mean that they are against you and against what your particular plight is. Unaffected means unaffected. It means that it's not a part of their life. It's not real in any substantial way to them. And for them to get engaged, they have to choose to be affected. So you've got all-out racists, you've got prejudiced and biased people, you've got people who choose positions of superiority and supremacy, and all along that particular spectrum, somewhere in the middle, you have people who are unaffected. We're affected way over here, these people way over here, these are the people that are doing the affecting for these people over here, and then the people in the middle, the unaffected, are people who are now being forced out of their own little, I call it suburban sensibilities. They're being forced out of their comfort zone, and they're being required to choose a side. And yes, listen, morality, Christianity, common decency you would think would lend, one side a favor over the other in this discussion. But again, these people, being unaffected people, have to choose to be affected. And we can't make people, we can't force people, we can't require people to be affected. That's not a healthy approach. It's not a constructive approach. It's not even a realistic approach. And so what you find is you find a bunch of people doing a bunch of hashtags and platitudes who feel obligated to do so, even though their worlds remain unaffected, because they're choosing not to be affected. They're hoping this goes away in a month. They're hoping it goes away in 6 months. They're hoping this time next year, all of this is a distant memory, and their little world goes back to the way it's always been, insulated from whatever it is that's affecting the Black community. Those are the unaffected. Now, being unaffected does not automatically make you a bad person. Being unaffected means you're unaffected. And the truth of the matter is, we're all unaffected. Everyone on the face of the earth is unaffected. We're just unaffected by different things. So before we start pointing fingers at the people who live a life that is unaffected by the blatant racism and the systemic oppression in people of color, be they brown or Black or anything else, there are people who are unaffected by that. Before we start pointing fingers at them and considering them a part of the problem, we have to think about all of the other evils in society. Because you're unaffected. You're unaffected. What about homelessness? Are you affected by homelessness? Are you a part of the fight on an everyday basis to go out and eradicate homelessness? Are you unaffected by child labor? Are you unaffected by human trafficking? Are you unaffected by our Hispanic brothers and sisters being kept in what amounts to cages on the southern border? Are you unaffected by starvation in Africa or disease in some third world country? What is it? Because you're unaffected, much like they are unaffected. And there's so much evil in the world, you can't be required to fight on every front and do so effectively. When people are affected, they are affected either by virtue of their essence being the target of what's doing the affecting, or by association to people who are being affected. Or something comes into their life, like the image of Mr. George Floyd being asphyxiated for almost 9 minutes on video, and the simple, comfortable callus being exhibited by Officer Chauvin. That affected people. And we're seeing that in the streets. There are people of every race, every color, every age, every demographic who's marching in the street because they were affected by that video. Some people remain unaffected. You have to give them room to figure out what all of this means to their lives. And if they choose that this means nothing to their lives, so be it. Don't waste your time trying to force someone to be affected. Because as long as we're alive, we'll deal with the unaffected. If someone's child is abducted, all of a sudden now they're affected. And the people around them become affected by association. The people who see it on the news, it's terrible. It's bad. Oh, it's something we don't wish on anyone. But are we truly affected? Are we truly affected by what's going on our southern borders? Are we truly affected by starvation and the lack of adequate medical care or even clean water in third world countries? Are we affected by child labor? Are we affected by all of these different things that we've kept ourselves insulated from? So don't be so quick to judge. Don't be so quick to condemn or convict, because the truth of the matter is, on some level, we're all unaffected. So, hopefully we can find the courage to fight our own fights. Hopefully we can find the courage to stand up for what's right when the opportunity presents itself. When we are affected, that we answer the call. That's the best we can hope for, and that's the best we can hope for and from our neighbors. So for those of you that remain unaffected, God bless you. For those of you that have been affected and chosen to join the fight, thank you. We appreciate it. And for all the causes out there that I and the others watching remain unaffected about, please, Lord, have mercy. There are too many fights for us to fight all of them. The best we can do is the best we can do. And that's usually more than we've already done. So I wrote something a few years ago. I'm trying to remember it. It says it's impossible to do anything more than you can do, but that's certainly no reason to do anything less. Make sense? Okay. Be good, people.